So hello everybody. So let us now discuss the practice questions under NEET Crash Course Biology. So we will start off with the chapter Photosynthesis in higher plants. In C4 plants, carbon dioxide combines with. Now please remember they're asking you which is the primary carbon dioxide acceptor in case of C4 plants. If you remember, in C3 plants, the primary carbon dioxide acceptor was ribulose bisphosphate. Now, in case of C4 plants, it is phosphoenol pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon compound. So, the answer is phosphoenol pyruvate. Photorespiration is favored by. See, photorespiration is a process in which rubisco is diverted from undergoing Calvin cycle or C3 cycle. Now, generally, rubisco gets very easily distracted by oxygen. So, the obvious answer would be when the concentration of oxygen or the ratio of oxygen to carbon dioxide is very, very high. That means there is high oxygen and less amount of carbon dioxide available, then this enzyme, that is rubisco, is diverted to a process that is referred to as photorespiration rather than carrying out Calvin cycle, and therefore the rate of photosynthesis suffers. Carbon dioxide acceptor in C3 plants. Now, I just told you in the first question also, the primary acceptor of carbon dioxide is a 5-carbon compound that is called ribulose biphosphate or ribulose bisphosphate. For assimilation of one carbon dioxide molecule, now if you take Calvin cycle with respect to one carbon dioxide molecule, you require how many ATP and how many NADPH? It is not NADPH2, it is actually NADPH. It should not be called NADPH2. So if you remember, carbon dioxide combines with ribulose bisphosphate, and we need for conversion of phosphoglycerate into 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate, we need 2 ATP molecules, and for regeneration we need 1 additional ATP molecule. So the most convincing option here is 3 ATP molecules, and for reduction of 1,3-bisphosphoglyceric acid into phosphoglyceraldehyde you need 2 molecules of reducing power, which is or assimilatory power, which is referred to as 2 NADPH. So as a result, the correct answer with respect to 1 Calvin cycle or 1 carbon dioxide is 3 ATP and 2 NADPH molecule. Which is the first carbon dioxide acceptor enzyme, they're asking. So which is the enzyme that catalyzes assimilation or acceptance of carbon dioxide by phosphoenol pyruvate? It is pepcase enzyme, that is phosphoenol pyruvate carboxylase. Just like in C3 plants there is rubisco enzyme, in C4 plants, in the C4 pathway, the very first step, which is the carboxylation of phosphoenol pyruvate, we need an enzyme that is called phosphoenol pyruvate carboxylase. Which pair is wrong? Now, the very first option is wrong because maize, the grass family, and sugarcane, all of them are not C3 plants, they are C4 plants. Now, why do we call them as C4 plants? Because the first stable compound that is formed during the during the dark reaction or the Calvin cycle in this, during the dark reaction where there is formation of biosynthesis of organic compound, in that it is C4, that is the 4-carbon compound. But here it is wrongly given that C3 maize is a C3 plant, whereas maize actually is a C4 plant. Classical experiment to prove essentiality of carbon dioxide, it was 1 mole, it was actually MOHL. Okay, so moles half-leaf experiment you must have heard of. So moles half-leaf experiment is something that proves that yes, carbon dioxide is very, very important for photosynthesis. During dark reaction for fixation of carbon, where does the 3 carbon atoms of, do you know what is 3-PGA? The 3-PGA is the first stable compound that is formed. That's why we call it as the C3 cycle, because it is nothing but a 3-carbon compound that is formed. They're asking where did the carbon for this come from? The carbon came from both the primary carbon dioxide acceptor, that is RuBP, as well as the carbon dioxide which gets added to RuBP. So it came from both RuBP as well as carbon dioxide. Which of the following is the first compound that accepts carbon dioxide during the dark reaction of photosynthesis? Again, they are talking about the primary acceptor of carbon dioxide. Now, the primary acceptor of carbon dioxide in the C3 cycle is ribulose bisphosphate, which happens to be a 5 carbon compound. Okay, so the answer is ribulose bisphosphate. First stable compound in C4 plants, we told already, we discussed that C4 plant means it exhibits C4 pathway. In C4 pathway, the first stable compound is a 4 carbon compound. So the 4 carbon compound that is formed here is referred to as oxaloacetic acid. Remember, for C3 pathway it is phosphoglyceric acid. In case of C4 pathway it is oxaloacetic acid. During light reaction of photosynthesis, which of the following phenomenon is observed both during cyclic and non-cyclic photophosphorylation? What is common for both cyclic photo and non-cyclic photophosphorylation? Release of oxygen, no, because it happens only in non-cyclic. Formation of NADPH also happens only in non-cyclic. Involvement of PS1 and PS2 also happens in non-cyclic. ATP formation through chemiosmotic model, we have learnt that happens in both cyclic and non-cyclic photophosphorylation. 1 ATP is released during cyclic and 2 ATP molecules are generated during non-cyclic photophosphorylation. Number of carboxylation reactions in Calvin cycle. Carboxylation means addition of carbon. It happens only in the first step, so it is only 1. It is only first step where carbon dioxide gets added to ribulose bisphosphate to form 2 molecules of 3 carbon compound, that is phosphoglyceric acid. And we told yesterday, we discussed that for 1 molecule of glucose, Calvin cycle has to happen 6 times. So it is 6 carbon dioxide with 6 RuBP to form 12 molecules of phosphoglycerate, which is a 3 carbon compound. The first step where ribulose bisphosphate accepts or is added with carboxylated with carbon dioxide is what is referred to as carboxylation, so it is only 1. C4 cycle is found in sugarcane. We have already discussed about this. Okay, so the answer is sugarcane. It should be B. Then we have assertion and reason questions. Bundle sheath cells of maize do not show gaseous exchange. Very true, because bundle sheath cells are heavily guarded against the entry of oxygen, because in the bundle sheath cell C3 cycle needs to take place. Okay, but why it doesn't happen in the and another reason why bundle sheath cell have less amount of oxygen in them is because in the bundle sheath cell, we had discussed yesterday, they have a special type of chloroplast in them that is called as A granule chloroplast. The reason they have a granule chloroplast is because you have to remember that in A granule chloroplast there is no grana and there is no light reaction. If grana is not there, light reaction does not happen, and as a result what happens here is that there is no oxygen, and this will allow Rubisco to focus exclusively on carbon dioxide fixation. So first statement is true, but second statement says neither carbon dioxide is fixed nor oxygen is evolved. Yes, of course oxygen is not evolved, because I told you in bundle sheath cells there are A granule chloroplast. But one thing you all have to remember here is that carbon dioxide is fixed, because inside the bundle sheath the C3 pathway or the Calvin cycle takes place. Yes or no? So since the Calvin cycle or the C3 pathway takes place inside the bundle sheath cell, you have to remember that carbon dioxide is fixed. So the reason is not entirely true. So we can say assertion is true but reason is false. Now moving on to the next chapter, that is respiration in plants. Now what is the formula for respiratory quotient? It is the volume of carbon dioxide evolved to volume of oxygen that is consumed. So that is the equation. Net gain of ATP from oxidization of 1 hexose is nothing but glucose molecule. So from 1 glucose molecule we get only 36 ATP molecules. So the net gain is 36 ATP molecule. Actually it is 38 ATP molecule, but remember NADH produced from glycolysis needs to be transported into mitochondria so that it can take part in electron transport chain. So for the transport of this NADH to mitochondria, 2 ATPs are used up. So therefore we can say that the net yield of ATP is only 36 ATP through the entire process of glycolysis, Krebs cycle, as well as electron transport chain. During anaerobic respiration in plants, sucrose is first broken down into glucose and fructose, and then later they undergo alcoholic fermentation. So that is, the product is carbon dioxide and ethanol. So the answer is alcohol in this case. Oxidative phosphorylation refers to, so what exactly is oxidative phosphorylation? It is the electron transport chain, isn't it? That is because electrons are removed from NADH and FADH2 and they are oxidized in return, and water and oxygen is reduced into water by picking up electrons and protons. And you all know the word associated with electron transport chain is production of ATP through chemiosmosis. So that is the correct answer. Connecting link between glycolysis and Krebs cycle is acetyl coenzyme A, because we saw that before Krebs cycle can start, if you remember, the end product of glycolysis, which is the end product of glycolysis, the pyruvic acid. The pyruvic acid is converted to acetyl coenzyme A, and this process is the bridging reaction between glycolysis and Krebs cycle. Acetyl coenzyme A joins the Krebs cycle and combines with oxaloacetic acid to form citric acid. RQ is less than 1 in the case of proteins and fat. So here they have not mentioned protein. So for fat, RQ is about, the value of RQ is about 0.7. It is low because you are going to use up more oxygen, but you are going to evolve less carbon dioxide. RQ of protein is about 0.9. For carbon dioxide, RQ is always equal to 1 because you are taking in and giving out the exact same amount of carbon dioxide and oxygen molecules. So RQ is less than 1 in case of fats and proteins, please remember. Cellular respiration occurs inside mitochondria. We saw that the common pathway for both aerobic and anaerobic respiration is glycolysis that happens in cytoplasm, and then mitochondrial matrix there is Krebs cycle, and inner mitochondrial membrane is electron transport chain. So cellular respiration happens in mitochondria. Pyruvic acid, where do you get pyruvic acid from? Now, pyruvic acid is basically obtained from glycolysis. What happens to pyruvic acid before it enters Krebs cycle? It is broken down into 2-carbon compound. Which is the 2-carbon compound? The 2-carbon compound that is acetyl coenzyme A by pyruvate dehydrogenase, isn't it? So it is broken down into 2-carbon compound, and a product given out is carbon dioxide. So the correct answer, and remember this happens during the bridging pathway between glycolysis and Krebs cycle. So the correct answer is last option, that is broken down into 2 carbon atoms and carbon dioxide. Where does Krebs cycle take place? Obviously, Krebs cycle takes place in mitochondria. To be very precise, where in the mitochondria does it take place? It takes place in the matrix or the fluid component of the mitochondria. The conversion of pyruvic acid to coenzyme A, pyruvic acid, is oxidized. Carbon dioxide is removed from it and hydrogen is removed. So it is oxidized. As a result, we say it is a dehydrogenase enzyme which has the ability to oxidize pyruvic acid, which is a 3-carbon compound, into acetyl coenzyme A, which is a 2-carbon compound. Breaking down of glycogen to glucose is referred to as glycogenolysis or glycogenolysis. Okay. In cellular respiration, ETS occurs as a downhill journey. Yes, electrons always flow downhill, but there is something wrong with the reason. It is always the flow of electron is from a low redox potential, low reduction to oxidation potential, to high reduction to oxidation potential. Obviously, because it is low reduction means, when I say if I have a low redox potential, I have less tendency to keep electrons with me, so I will give it to you. Now you will have a higher redox potential than me. That means you will have a higher tendency to pick up oxygen. So always remember, electron flow is happening not from high to low redox potential. It's happening from low redox potential to high redox potential. Low redox potential means greater tendency to greater tendency to give away electron. High redox potential means greater tendency to keep electrons with them. So assertion is true, but reason is false in this particular case. Electron transport system is found in where? It is found in the inner mitochondrial membrane. You have lot of complexes which are arranged serially in the inner mitochondrial membrane. The number of multi-protein complexes in the inner mitochondrial membrane is 5. There is complex 1 to complex 5. So totally there are 5 complexes that are present. The complex concerned with oxidative phosphorylation, the ultimate the ultimate complex involved in obtaining energy by all these oxidative processes, like oxidation of NADH in complex 1 and oxidation of FADH2 in complex 2, is complex 5. Now complex 5 is nothing but ATP synthase molecule, which helps. What passes through complex 5? Electrons pass through them, and they help in coupling that electron motive force into phosphorylating. That's why it's called phosphorylation, adding ADP. So what does complex 5 do? It uses the energy from the electron and it adds adenosine diphosphate. It phosphorylates adenosine diphosphate in order to obtain the energy currency of the cell, which is nothing but the ATP. Okay, so moving on to the next chapter, that is locomotion and movement. Trochoid joint is another name for rotary joint or pivot joint. You know that pivot joint is where one bone rotates freely around the other bone. So rotary or pivot joint is also called a trochoid joint. Where do you find this rotary joint? It is found between the ulna and the radius. If you remember, between the head of the radius and the ulnar, the radial notch on the ulna, and more importantly, it is also found in your neck. That is between the atlas and the axis of your neck. Okay, so this is referred to as the pivot or the rotary or the trochoid joint. Which of the following permits movement in two axes? It is ellipsoidal joint. Actually, even saddle joint functions very similar to the ellipsoidal joint, because it also allows free movement in two different axes. Ellipsoidal joint is an incomplete ball and socket joint. It is referred to as the condyloid joint. Okay, so the answer would be ellipsoidal joint. Correct option among all the following is hinge joint between vertebrae, gliding joint. So it is gliding joint that is seen between the projections which are meant for articulation found on the vertebrae, called zygapophysis, and the successive vertebrae that you see. It is called the planar or the gliding joint. So that is the correct answer, the correct match among the following. Okay. Why isn't it between vertebrae? So between vertebrae we saw it is gliding or planar joint. Between phalanges it is what? It is hinge joint between phalanges. You can move your phalanges only along, that is between your fingers. You can move only in one particular axis. So it is hinge joint between the bones of your phalanges, the fingers. And skull bone is not cartilaginous joint. Skull bone is a type of fibrous joint that is called as suture. It is an immovable. It's also called as synarthrosis or fibrous joint, isn't it? You cannot move your skull bone, so it is called suture. It is not a cartilaginous joint. So among all the ones that are given, the correct answer is the gliding joint between zygapophysis of the successive vertebrae. If a muscle undergoes rapid contraction and relaxation, what needs to be happening if a muscle keeps contracting and relaxing? What needs to be happening in the sarcoplasmic reticulum? Constantly there should be pumping in and out calcium ions, because without calcium ions, the formation of cross bridge between actin and myosin is not possible. So the correct answer is, if a muscle is rapidly contracting and relaxing, you require constant plugging in and out, meaning pumping in and out of calcium. Okay. Which one of the following lubricates the ligaments and tendons? There is a fluid in your bone, in your joint, which is called as the synovial fluid, and the synovial fluid contains a mucopolysaccharide that is called hyaluronic acid. So the answer is hyaluronic acid. It makes sure that your joints are well lubricated, and it acts as a mechanical shock absorber, prevents the bones from rubbing against each other, thus reducing the friction. Which of the following assists in locomotion of organisms stated? Now, pedicellariae in starfish, no, it is not for locomotion, it is a protective structure. Epithelium cannot be locomotory structure. Trichocyst is for defense. The correct answer is posterior. Anterior sucker in leech is, that is Hirutinaria granulosa, is Indian cattle leech. If it is anterior sucker, it is for feeding, but the posterior sucker is what is meant for the process of locomotion. Okay. It is a diagram of the bones of the human left limb. As you can see, there's something wrong with it. Let us see what is wrong with it. Okay, femur is correctly labeled. Okay, now see what mistake they have done. They have labeled the broader bone as fibula. It should be the other way around. The broader one on the medial side. Now this is your left leg. So if this is your left leg, this is the lateral side and this is the medial side. The medial side is not fibula, it is tibia. So fibula and tibia are not labeled properly in this particular case. So please remember the tibia and the fibula. It is mentioned here, fibula and phalanges, even the phalanges, correct. The phalanges also, see, they reverse the tibia and fibula, and actually they have labeled the metatarsal as the phalanges. At the tip they should have labeled the phalanges because those are the bones of the toes. The muscle band that remains unchanged during contraction and relaxation, myosin does not contract. The region of the sarcomere where you find myosin or the thick filament is the A or the dark or the anisotropic band, which does not change. Now, which bone are they pointing in the skull? Now, they are pointing towards this broad, circular, roughly circular bone, which is two on either side, one on either side of your skull. It is the temporal bone of your skull. So, the correct answer is the temporal bone. Which statement is correct for muscle contraction? Now, in muscle contraction, the length of the edge zone decreases. Now, why does the length of the edge zone decrease? Because the two actin filaments get pulled closer to each other. If the actin filaments get pulled closer to each other, they overlap in the center, and the slightly less dark zone within the A band, which is called the edge zone, also disappears. Now, which is the correct matching option they're asking over here? Now, cytosine, uracil, and thymine, adenine, they're all calling it as pyrimidines. Okay, now see, this is not thymine, THY, it is vitamin thymine, so this cannot be the answer. Malleus, incus, and cochlea. Cochlea is not an inner ear or middle ear ossicle, so that is wrong. Then last one, middle one says ilium, ischium, pubis, coxal bone. Yes, so this is the correct answer, ilium, ischium, and pubis. And how can rhodopsin be a muscle protein? It is not true. So the correct answer is the third answer, that is ilium, ischium, and pubis. Now let us see which is the correct match over here. Tibia and fibula both form a form of knee joint. Obviously not, because tibia and fibula are there in your shin or the shank. Cartilage and cornea, they don't have blood supply but they need oxygen. Very correct. Cartilage and cornea should be clear, so obviously they don't have blood supply, but they do take oxygen from diffusion by the nearby vascular tissues. Shoulder and elbow joint, they're saying elbow joint, how can it be a ball and socket joint? Elbow joint is a hinge joint, so this is wrong. Premolars and molars are 20 in all and 3 rooted, they're saying. So if you count all the premolars and molars, they are not and not all the premolars and molars are 3 rooted. If you take the molars of your mandible, they are 2 rooted. Okay, only the premolar, the first premolar of your upper jaw is 3 rooted, so this is also not correct. So only the correct answer is cartilage and cornea, no blood supply, but they do require oxygen for respiratory need. Which one of the following is the correct description of a certain part of the normal human skeleton? Parietal bone and temporal bone is joined by suture, fibrous joint. This type of fibrous or this type of joint that joins two bones of the skull is referred to as the suture. So yes, this is the correct answer in this given option. Scapula is a triangular flat bone on the back of your upper shoulder, and it is extending between the second and the seventh rib. So this is a factual information. Between the second and the seventh rib, the length of the scapula extends the width of, it spans the second to the seventh ribs on the back of your angle of your shoulder. The type of muscle present in our upper arm, smooth muscle, not possible. Upper arm, it is obviously your skeletal muscle. Heart is involuntary and unstriated, not possible. Heart is cardiac muscle, which is striated. Intestine is striated, no. Intestinal muscles you cannot control, they are smooth muscles, so involuntary is correct but striated is wrong. Thigh muscles are striated, they are skeletal and they are voluntary, so the last option is the correct option. So now let us move on to the next chapter, the last chapter in this week's this lecture of NEET crash course, that is neural control and coordination. Which of the following are developmental regions of the brain? Rhombencephalon, prosencephalon. Please remember, prosencephalon is the developing forebrain, rhombencephalon is the developing hindbrain, and mesencephalon is the developing midbrain. Okay. As a patient scheduled for surgery confides, now he has to undergo surgery, but he says that he is getting very, very anxious, terribly scared, and also it would obviously indicate that his sympathetic nervous system is hyperactive now. So what are the features of sympathetic nervous system? So he feels that his mouth is running dry, very important, that is true, and then his gown is moist with perspiration. Yes, he's sweating a lot, and patient appears very pale, he's flushed in appearance. All of the above, all of these these are symptoms of a sympathetic nervous system. So whenever a person is facing an emergency or an emotionally heightened situation, he goes through all of these. Which of the following is not a function of autonomic nervous system? Autonomic nervous system is involuntary. It controls visceral organ. It transmits signal impulses, both sensory and motor. It regulates all the vital activities of your heart, lungs, your brain, etc. Okay, but most importantly, it does not control the conscious part of your motor activity. Okay, so it is unconscious. Say for example, reflex action, it is unconscious. Autonomic nervous system, now you don't realize that you're getting tense. The moment you hear something tense, or when you are in an emotional state, you get tensed because you don't have that conscious control. So autonomic nervous system is not conscious, it is unconscious. If the light source in the front of eye becomes bright suddenly, obviously what will happen? The pupil will contract so that less amount of light will reach into your eye. So this is referred to as pupil constriction, isn't it? Pupil constriction is also one of the properties of parasympathetic nervous system. When you're relaxed, the pupil will constrict, and also when there is a light suddenly flashing into your eyes, the pupil will constrict. The ciliary body is located at the junction of iris and choroid. Choroid is the middle layer of the eyeball, the point where iris originates and extends slightly outwardly. Inside you have the ciliary body with suspensory ligament holding the lens in position. Which of the following would not result from sympathetic stimulation? Now, if you stimulate the sympathetic nervous system of a person, renin will not be secreted, then his peristalsis will not be inhibited, will result from so increase in renin secretion happens only due to parasympathetic. All of you remember one thing: whenever your blood pressure falls, only then your renin will be increased, and blood pressure fall is because of parasympathetic, not sympathetic. Okay, and sympathetic nervous system will inhibit peristalsis, they have said, which is actually true, will not result, they said. So increased renin secretion will result, and then peristalsis will be inhibited, dilates your bronchioles. Now when you're experiencing sympathetic nervous system, what basically happens is you have to breathe in more because you are facing an emergency situation. Because you are facing an emergency situation, you have to breathe in more, so obviously your bronchial will be dilated. So it says, what does the answer say? It says all of the above, but I think whenever there is a sympathetic nervous system, yes, actually this is also correct, it increases the renin secretion. So all of you remember one thing: whenever there is low blood pressure, it is quickly picked up by the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system will then trigger the kidney to produce renin. Actually, we say that directly low blood pressure triggers the renin production. That's why I was thinking about the explanation part here. So it is true that whenever there is a fall in BP, that is a sign of parasympathetic, then sympathetic will take over, and immediate response is release of renin from the juxtaglomerular cells of the kidney. So yes, increased renin is also a sympathetic stimulation. So all of them result. They're asking which one would not result. So all of them would result, isn't it? From what? From sympathetic stimulation. So it should be they're asking which one would not result. So it should be none of these, right? Because all of them do result from it. So let me change the options slightly. None of them do not result, because all of them do result as a result of sympathetic stimulation. Because of sympathetic stimulation, increased renin. Because of sympathetic stimulation, peristalsis is inhibited. Because of sympathetic stimulation, your bronchioles are dilated, you're breathing in more. So instead of all of the above, it should be none of the above, because the question says which will not result. None of them will not result. That means all of them will result. Okay. Parasympathetic fibers arise from 3, 7, 9 and 10 nuclei of your brain. Nuclei means they are clusters of cytons. All the parasympathetic nerves emerge mostly from these neurons, which are located in the 3rd, 7th, 9th and the 10th nuclei, which are clusters of cyton in your medulla, in your brain. So it is 3, 7, 9, 10. The cell bodies of preganglionic neurons. Remember, the sympathetic neurons always originate from the grey matter of the spinal cord, because the grey matter is specifically the region where you find all the cell bodies. Yes or no? Otoconia are ear stones. It is found in the sacculus and utriculus. In the sacculus and utriculus, if you remember, there are sensory spots which are referred to as macula. On the macula, you have the otolith membrane, which is a gelatinous membrane. On them, you will find calcium carbonate encrustations, which are referred to as the ear stones, which are called as otoconia. Which pairing of nerve and an organ innervation is incorrect? Now, the incorrect one, the most easiest one, is the abducens nerve, because abducens nerve innervates your eyeball muscle and not your facial muscle. So, it is the last option. An inability to walk in a straight line, obviously that means your body balance is upset. Now that is because a nerve that carries signals from your semicircular canal, from your utriculus and sacculus, that is your vestibulocochlear nerve, is something is wrong with the vestibulocochlear nerve. So your cerebellum is not receiving signals about the orientation of your body with respect to gravity, your head position, etc., and therefore you cannot walk in a straight line. The rectus, I was telling you, the eyeball muscles, you're able to move your eyes to the side, not towards your nose, away from your nose. Now that is called the lateral rectus muscle, and this kind of a movement where you move your eyeball away from your nose outwardly, it is called the abduction, and that is because of the abducens nerve. See, the abducens nerve is the one that brings forth abduction of your eyeball. Remember, eyeball movement away from your nose is called abduction, and that is because of lateral rectus muscle, which is innervated by the abducens nerve. Hypermetropia means your lens becomes flattened and you can only see objects which are far away. It is long-sightedness. So that means the image coming from the closer objects are not bent enough, so they are formed behind the retina and they are corrected by using a convex, because you need to bend the light coming from the closer objects. But here the light bending ability of the lens is lost, because in hypermetropia what happens to the lens? The lens becomes less convex. In myopia it becomes bulged like this. It becomes thick, but in hypermetropia the lens becomes flat, it becomes less convex, therefore you need to correct it by using a convex lens. Second, 7th, 8th and 9th cranial nerves. The second one is optic, the 7th one is facial, the 8th one is auditory, and the 9th one is glossopharyngeal nerve. So it is the first option. In old age, the vision becomes dim. Obviously, if the vision is dim and if the vision is not, it's cloudy, it's not clearly visible, it is most probably because the cornea has lost its transparency, or it is becoming opaque, or an opaque layer is growing on the lens. Then we refer to it as cataract. The growth of an opaque protein layer on the lens is referred to as cataract. So obviously it could be a result of cataract. So this completes the practice questions, some of the practice questions from all the 4 chapters for NEET crash course. Thank you.